All right, Black Box Radio. Listen, guys, I am so excited. I'm in the actual box. I'm in bbR. It's feeling good. I've been in South Carolina for a while, so I'm back in Baltimore, and we're back in the box doing our thing. I'm Queen. I'm a host at Black Box Radio. We are a multimedia platform illustrating Black excellence. We platform Black people. We expose Black genius, and we also disseminate information to the Black community and other communities. It's important for us to have an authentic space for us to communicate as Black people. So that's what we do, maybe 3-4 times a month. Check us out at on YouTube, please, on YouTube, because Facebook, I'm always in jail, guys. I stay on death row. So I'm out of death row right now. I'm home. But at any time they put me back. So please, YouTube is a very liberating type platform, and we're there at Black Box Radio. Check us out there. But we're also on all social media platforms. But you can also communicate with us at blackboxradio@gmail.com. You can drop us a line. We will sure get back to you within 24 business hours. I got that from my guest today. I got that from my guest. You see my guest sitting over there. So I'm so happy to be back. And it's just so I think it's just the right time to talk about something that I think is so important. And that's why I had to reach out to this wonderful young lady you see sitting over there. And I'm just so happy. I want us to first welcome Melanie Hood-Wilson. Say hi to the people, Melanie.
Hello. Hi. I'm so happy to be here on Black Box Radio. I'm happy that we are in the same city, this beautiful city of
Baltimore.
ours, Baltimore. It's a
Yes.
beautiful city. It's a beautiful struggle. It's full of beautiful people with beautiful souls and beautiful communities.
You better
Don't
say
sleep
it.
on Baltimore.
Do not sleep on Baltimore. I hear a lot about Baltimore, but it's beautiful. And it's a black city. That's
It
what I love
is
about it. It has a
beautifully
lot.
Black.
Beautiful black city. So please don't talk about Baltimore in this space, because we loving on Baltimore for sure. For sure. So this is going to be a sister circle also. So these are the sisters, and we're about to have a great conversation. Melanie Hood-Wilson is the CEO of Melanie Hood-Wilson Associates. As you can see, it's a diversity, equity, and inclusion firm. And what's so important, DEI, we hear about this over and over, Melanie. I've been hearing it. Oh, I went to Morgan State University. So when it came to going to HBCU, I had the pleasure and the greatest opportunity to see Black genius on a grand scale, from the janitor to the president. So it was a beautiful thing to see. And then you come out to this world where it's very diverse, and it's like you go to college, and college is like this closed place, and my closed place was Black.
Mhm.
And then you get graduate, and they open up to this well. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
And so when you say that you have a actual firm that is centered around this, let's talk about it a little. What is DEI? Let's just say that first.
Okay. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. It stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And diversity, I'll just explain each of the terms. I'm sure your
Okay.
audience
Please
understands
do.
all three
I
of
want
those
you to.
words, but people do have different understandings of words. Diversity meaning not just tokenism, not just having a person with a brown face, an
Mm.
Asian person, um, a person who identifies as LGBTQ, but having all of the voices organically brought to the table, but also very intentionally brought to the
Mm.
table with an understanding that unless you have all of the voices of those people affected by decisions sitting at the table able to weigh in, your
Yes.
decisions are going to have, number one, they're going to have unintended consequences, but
Mm.
number two, they're not actually going to meet the needs of the people you're trying to serve, because you need to hear it from the people themselves, not guessing what people want. Equity, not equality. I mean, we've come a long way in this country.
Yes.
In the 60s, we were asking for equality. We just wanted an equal chance to be able to do, we just wanted not to be blocked out.
Yes.
Now the conversation is different. Now that we, okay, those some of those barriers are
Mm-hmm.
gone. And now the conversation is, okay, great. So I can apply for the job as well. But first of all, Let's look at the fact that maybe my education is not the same because I didn't have the generational wealth, to be able to get in as, to have, I'm not going to say only wealthy people go to Harvard or to Ivies, because that's not true. But we do know that when, there are a lot of wealthy people at Ivies and other prestigious colleges. So I may not have the family connections. I may not have the generational wealth. As I'm applying for jobs, maybe my name is a name that doesn't flow so easily off of your tongue. All of these things are part of that equation. And so now the question is, well, is it fair to say that a person who is coming into, and I'm using employment as an opportunity, but this is true for so many things. Is it fair to say that a person who has had a lot of advantages, a person who does not suffer from everyone suffers from unconscious bias, but someone who's not on the receiving end of unconscious bias that often leads to not being hired for jobs, someone who maybe has generational wealth and was able to, or whose family knows people and has had the connections to be able to get the interview, because we know that most jobs are not obtained through filling in an application unless you're going to work at McDonald's, Burger King, unless it's an hourly job. Typically for something that is higher paying and for professional level jobs, most people get those jobs through networks that they're a part of. And we live in a very segregated society. So now the question is, if you have all of those things going for you and this other person does not, how equal is that playing field? So equity is about making sure that everyone has what they need to be successful. Instead of saying, well, I applied for the job, you applied for the job, I must have been the better candidate, because that we know that that's not the reality of how things work. And then inclusion being, again, going back to my first statement about making sure everyone is at the table, but then also listening, asking the right questions, and then making space for other people to tell their truths, their perspectives, to drop knowledge on you that maybe you don't already have. And that broadens everyone's perspectives on whatever it is that you're working on. An example of that I would give, we do a lot of disabilities justice work as well. And so there's this phrase that's often used in the disabilities justice world, nothing about us without us. I think that is magical.
Wow. I love that.
I apply that to all DEI work. So if you're trying to do some things, we're black box radio here, so I'm going to keep it black. So if your organization is talking about doing something that's going to serve Black communities, going to diversity, first of all, who's sitting at the table? Do you have Black folks? And do you have Black folks from the community? Because that's another thing I've seen a lot of in the nonprofit world in particular. Oh, well, we have brown faces in the table. Baltimore's a Black city. Look at our board. We've got Black people on our board. But if all the Black people have master's degrees and high-level jobs, and we're talking about an organization that's going to serve like rank and file Baltimoreans, people who may not have high-level degrees and may not have high-level jobs, people who are struggling day to day to put food on their tables, because Baltimore has a lot of poverty. And as we know, communities of color, BIPOC communities, I should say, often tend to have a lot of poverty, BIPOC being Black, Indigenous, people of color, which includes Latinos. And there are systemic reasons why we tend to be overly represented in communities of poverty. But my point is that if you are planning to serve a community, let's say, or serve the Black community of Baltimore, you need to have people on the board who understand and are representative of the experiences of the people who you are serving. So I can do that to an extent. I grew up in Edmondson Village in the 1970s and 80s. I went to Baltimore City Public Schools all the way through. But my life has been a little bit different in my adult aftermath than it is for a lot of folks. So I'd love to serve, but also talk to the people who really represent the folks you're serving, and to be comfortable doing that. A lot of times I feel like there is, and this is also, Black folks do this too, there's this idea that when we're serving communities that we have to have the most educated people in the room. We have
Yes.
to have the people with the big vocabularies and the fancy resumes, and we end up shortchanging the community when we do
We
that.
do. We
So
do.
that's a big part of that diversity piece of that. Equity, always interrogating ourselves for our own privilege. I'm a Black girl. I identify as pansexual. I mean, I've got a disability. I've got all the things, but I have a lot more privilege than a lot of other people do. You know,
Mm.
and so we always need to check ourselves for our own privilege. So when we're having conversations about equity, it should be from the lens of, well, I know what I need to be successful. What does this community or what do these folks need to be successful, as opposed to my projecting what I feel made me successful and some bar that they should be able to reach based on my own assumptions or my own worldview.
I love that, because when we look at society, we're all in sections, and then we silo out with, of course, color, what we make, what we do. We have all these boxes.
Yeah.
And so then you come into community and you see all these boxes come together to service one box.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they do not understand that box.
No.
And what you said is so important, that they have to be present. Everyone has to come to the table. And I think when I'm hearing about all these repeals and all of this, I think of DEI, it's because people are fearful.
They are.
Do you think is it fear? What's the issue? Why don't you want to be diverse? Why don't you want equity? Why don't you want inclusion? What's the issue?
Well, I can give you my theories.
Give me a theory.
It's okay. I mean, this is probably going to be a long, as you've noticed, I give long answers, but this will probably be a long answer. All right. I'm going to just, I feel like history is so useful. One, because it helps us to understand where we were, which we need, because we're talking about why people are so scared.
Yes.
History also informs us of how we got to where we are right now.
Yes.
I'm in my 50s. I find myself doing a lot of looking back on this half a century plus of life and trying to make sense of things, connecting dots, coming up with larger themes, making sense of things. One thing that it was an epiphany, actually, that I had doing some research around race and America within the last few months. I did some research and came to this epiphany that, before the Civil Rights Act, and I mean, this is historical knowledge that a lot of people have, but before the Civil Rights Act of 1965, America was mostly very white and very Black. And there were indigenous folks and there were Latino folks and there were Asian people here, but not in large-ish numbers.
Sure.
Civil Rights Act of 1965 didn't just give you and me full citizenship as Black women. It also opened the doors for more immigration, for people of color from around the world. So our Asian brothers and sisters, many are here because that civil rights law allowed those doors to be open. Our African brothers and sisters, our Caribbean brothers and sisters. So basically, with this one act, America got a whole lot more interesting looking really fast. And in the work I do, I work with organizations whose leadership sort of spans different generations. What I find in working with people who, and when I say, I'm going to be very specific here because we live in America. And most organizations to this day are run by white people and typically white men. So when I'm talking about my clients, I typically am talking about white organizations or white-led organizations. I find that when I'm working with baby boomers, there's a lot of resistance to modern ideas around race.
Okay, baby boomers. So define that. So
people who were born between the time World War II ended, and I believe the magic year for them is 1963.
Well, that would be about 60 in their 60s and 70s.
Right. Yes, the youngest of the generation being maybe Barack Obama is like, he's like at the end of that generation. He's like a very young baby boomer. So if you think about the world they've lived in, they've spent a good deal of their lives before, well, not all of them, but they grew up in a time either before that Civil Rights Act or just right after it.
Yeah,
And
America's racist past. That's when they grew up. That's what happened.
exactly. And
Yes,
everything they saw reflected back to them was
exactly.
whiteness. If you turned on the television, you saw Beaver Cleaver and you saw Father Knows Best. Or you and all these families were white. Their
Yep.
friends were white. Their neighbors were white. You went to the movies. You saw Marilyn Monroe. Yes, there were movies featuring Black folks, but we also know a lot of those movies, we were the ones who went to see them. If you're talking to most Americans and you ask them about movies in the 50s and 60s, they're talking about Monroe. They're talking
Yeah.
about who else was big at that
Henry
time?
Bogart and those guys, right?
Yeah,
I don't
it's
really
a
know.
sea of white faces.
Yes,
And same thing with politics, with media, with the news. Your most
absolutely.
trusted news
Walter
journalists were
Cronkite.
all Walter Cronkite, all of these guys. So then you have Gen X, and the generation I was born into, beginning in 64, ends in, I believe, 80.
So this is 50-year-olds and 40-year-olds,
Right. 50
late
and 40
40s,
year olds, middle-aged folks.
mid 40s, yeah,
Yes,
and
yes.
mid 50s.
Right. Yeah. All the way up to, yeah. And so we came into a world where we were still unfortunately seeing a lot of the remnants of sort of that whiteness reflected constantly.
But it was
But
dissipating.
but it was after, and it was also right after the civil rights movement. The
True.
70s were pretty progressive for America.
Mm-hmm.
And, we started to see that's when we started to see more in terms of affirmative action, and we started seeing more in terms of programs for minority owned businesses, and things that were designed to help Black folks, but really all people of color, to
And we
get a
had
leg
neighborhoods that
up.
were flourishing. We had places that were flourishing that were Black.
We did.
Yes.
We were finally, that's where the equity comes in. And
Mm-hmm.
we didn't call it that back then. It wasn't called equity, but that's where, these conversations started. Well, then what do we do to help people who have been systemically cut out of the American dream, to
Sure.
be able to make up some time and some distance in that? And we see that in television, right? I mean, I'm a big TV girl, but you have like Different Strokes, and you have
Good Times.
Good
Good
Times,
Times is a little later.
and the
The
Jeffersons, and all of
Jeffersons, yeah.
these things. And the
Mm-hmm.
messages with a lot of, and by the way, I'll just say almost all those shows were written by white writers, not by people of color.
Allegedly, because the story is those shows were stolen. But you're right.
Yes, Good Times. There's a whole conversation to have around Good Times,
A whole
and it's an ugly one. Yeah.
yes.
But what we see in Gen X is sort of this. Okay, well, there are people who are not white. The world is not all white. We see more people in movies who are of color. We start to see, Shirley Chisholm and Jesse Jackson, and people running for national office who are people of color. And during that time, the message though to white America wasn't, oh, wow, look, we're all really different and let's talk about this. It was, it's bad to see race. You don't see race. I don't see race. Nobody sees race.
Color.
And I don't see color. I don't see color. And
I wasn't brought up like that. Okay.
Exactly. And it's a very defensive pose. It's basically, I'm not the people with the fire hoses. I'm not the people, stalking children.
I didn't do this to you, so it's not me.
Yeah, exactly. I don't, because I don't see color.
Yeah.
And that was not effective. It was not helpful to people of color, because if I'm telling you that I need you to be my ally in disrupting systems, but you don't even see my color, how do you know that I'm even in need of your allyship in the first place? So yeah, we came in this really weird time where we were a much more multicultural generation, but nobody kind of knew how to handle that or what to do with it. And during my generation, this sort of magical thing happened called hip hop. And by the time the millennials, who are the generation after me, reached adulthood, they were seeing all kinds of cultures on screen. And especially since we're focusing on Blackness today, so a lot of Blackness on screen. People who are 10, 15 years younger than I am grew up, first of all, okay, going back to hip hop, the music the
Music
fashion,
took over
culture.
the
Hip hop is
culture of it. Yes.
culture, and it really has made a massive impact on America and how younger generations deal with race. Now, I'm not saying that things are perfect or the millennials are fantastic with race, because that's not true. But I will say that they have an exposure.
Yeah, they had
that people,
a healthy depiction of
right,
our culture and who we were. And they had to see us
exactly.
because it was the music that was originating from us.
Exactly. And with
Yeah.
that music, again, came so many things. I mean, you can,
Mhm.
there are even movies from the 90s that are just very much a part of
The culture.
the hip hop culture.
Mhm.
So and again, in the 90s and 2000s, you see more people of color of all races going into national politics and
Yes.
into the news media and all of these places that people look to see who's reflected back.
Yes.
And what America looks like and is supposed
Even
to
the
be
jobs, though,
about.
your personal life, your jobs, you start to have other supervisors,
That's
other
right.
people, other leadership. You see things that you wouldn't normally see. Let's say that.
And I will say, and I feel like as a person who's Gen X, I'm kind of really in the middle of all of this,
The
because I've
middle
dealt
of
with
it.
a lot
Yes.
of people from the baby boomer generation as supervisors and such during a lot of my life. And then, being in the workforce long enough now to see even the Zoomers, the Gen Z, the people my children's age, coming into the workforce. But
Yes.
yeah, it's changed, but we still have a long way to go, because also,
Yeah.
unfortunately, part of what came with that whole millennial 90s and 2000s embracing of certain things from Black culture was also lifting things from Black culture, sometimes erasing the Black culture that created the thing.
Absolutely.
Or, there was a video I watched recently of a guy talking about this. The word, and this is actually a white dude, and the words he used were touching things that don't belong to you. And I thought that was a really profound way of saying it. Not
That's
to
America.
say
That's America's life. That's where America
it
lives. We're
is.
touching things that don't belong to us,
Exactly, including land from other people.
including
Yeah,
everything.
everything,
Yeah.
everything. So that's, that was kind of and now the Gen Z, they knock me out. They have an interesting and profound understanding of these things in ways that other generations don't. And again, that's not saying everybody, but that's saying the people in that generation who get it, oh, do they get it?
Yeah, the exposure, I think,
It is. Oh, yeah.
Melanie, is, even with dog and cats, if you keep them around each other long enough, they're going to be friends.
That's right.
And I think the exposure, we get past, like you see Gen X and now Gen Z,
Yeah.
they have gone to school, they've seen that they've been bombarded with other people. So they
Right.
don't have the same, I think, malice or the same
No,
expectations.
or the same ignorance either.
Or
And
ignorance,
there's an
yes.
ignorance. And I think that part of that is also that younger generations acknowledge that there is a thing called Black culture. I don't
Huh.
come from the same culture
And they
as
love it.
my white friends or relatives. My
Yes,
world, my culture is different.
yes.
And that's something that I think is new in the conversation. We don't all come from the same culture. So you've got to take some steps to understand me. I got to take some steps to understand you.
But they
And that
recognize where the creativity is coming from.
they do.
And they absolutely and they actually pay homage to it. And before they would take it,
Right.
repackage, and
Right.
say it's ours. But
Yeah.
these young folks are like, no, this is where this came from. We're going to celebrate it like it is. That's what I like about them.
I see so much of that
Yeah,
in that generation. And okay, so you went to a predominantly Black college
I did.
or university. You went to Morgan
The
University.
Morgan State University.
Go Bears.
Go Bears.
I went to a predominantly white institution, and it's a college that is very near and dear to my heart. I had a fantastic education there. I met my husband there. I love the school. But my experience was that I went to, because I grew up in Baltimore, which is mad segregated. I went to an elementary school that was literally 100% Black.
Wow.
Every single student in the
What was the name
school.
of that?
Mary
School?
E. Rodman Elementary School, number 2 and
Wow.
4.
Every single child was Black.
Every single child in the school when I was there was Black. We were 100% Black.
Man.
We did have a couple of white teachers, and one white assistant principal. I mean, when I say a couple of white teachers, I mean literally 2. So it was a it was like I was steeped
Not
in
many people can
Blackness
say that.
for 6 years, from K through 6, first grade through 6th grade, but I went to an all-Black preschool before that. So you could say from birth until I was 12, I had been just in this
That's
cocoon
a
of
good
Blackness.
grounding.
It
Mm,
is. It was.
mhm.
You know, the school I went to was not considered to be like the best school academically or whatever, but I can tell you, I know how to sing, lift every voice and sing. And there were multiple Paul Lawrence Dunbar poems that we had to memorize. And there was this sort of this
You knew your
energy because
peoples. Like
you knew
I
your
didn't know about
people.
him until I got to college. So
See,
you
and
knew
this,
about your
oh
people.
yeah, I had a wonderful foundation from the school because it was right after the
Absolutely.
civil rights movement. And the sort of the vibe coming from the teachers was
Yep.
like, people have just fought fights and lost lives for you to have opportunities. So you owe it to more than just you.
Black teachers matter, baby. Black
Black
teachers matter.
teachers matter.
Woo,
And
they
I
do.
had almost nothing but Black teachers until I was 12. So
Mm.
at 12, I got bussed off to an advanced academic program on the opposite side of town in a very white neighborhood. The school was actually really diverse. And I will say that the advanced academic classes were too, because the stereotype is that the advanced classes will be mostly white or white and Asian.
Mhm.
That thankfully was not true with the school. But that was my first time ever, 12, knowing white people other than a couple of teachers. And
Wow.
then I went to a high school that was also very diverse.
Because
But
your
still,
neighborhood was Black,
my
Emerson.
neighborhood was
The village
100%.
is Black,
Doesn't
100%.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So I went to college and I had the opposite experience from you.
Where'd you go to college?
I went to Sarah Lawrence College, which is
Where's that?
it's in New York. It's about 30
Mm,
minutes from the city, and it's in a very affluent suburb.
beautiful.
And it has a lot of very affluent kids. It's a very expensive school. I was there on tons of financial aid. And so I get there, and again, keeping in mind, this is 1989.
Okay.
And this is the first time I have ever been in a predominantly white space. Because even though I went to schools where I was at white classmates, it's Baltimore. I was never in the minority.
Be
This was
more,
the
baby.
first time I had ever been in the minority. That first week, at least 2 boys who were white boys, told me that I was there because of quotas, but not to worry because they were sure I'd do fine. I could probably keep up. Yeah.
So that was their duty to tell you that.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't
Yeah.
that something?
And in the most reassuring way possible, just
I'm
don't
sure.
worry about it. We know you're only here because of quotas, but I'm sure you'll be all right. How
Wow.
kind. Wasn't that a kind way to? I mean, and the thing is, I look at that now and who knows? Was there malice? Who knows? Maybe. It was probably,
But it's a
though,
microaggression, though.
pure ignorance. And it was
Yeah,
a
it's ignorance and it's a
microaggression.
microaggression.
Yes,
Mhm.
and microaggressions are almost always
Yep.
born of ignorance. The
Absolutely.
problem comes in when you try to alert someone of or teach someone about their ignorance, and they reject that because they can't look at themselves enough or reflect on their own behaviors or biases or their own
Mhm.
journey enough to be able to accept what you're saying. And that's when it turns into, you're a snowflake, or why is everybody so sensitive? Oh, you're too woke. All of these, by the way, don't even get me
Well, we
started on
start
how I
using the
detest the
labels.
word of woke. Woke.
We
Erica
the quote woke.
Badu and others before her birthed this gorgeous term that
Yep.
encompassed what we're doing right here now. Black
Yep.
people being aware, researching, thinking about why we're here and how we can disrupt this stuff. And
Yes.
now it's been turned into what PC was in the 90s, and that
But
makes me mad.
anything great with Africans, people come in and take. We know this, and they flip it because it
Yeah.
gives us power, and they
Well,
understand that, and so they take the power from the movement and the word.
yes.
If we're going to create something, we always create something else because we're
and
the creatives.
You
of the
know
world.
what? I'm going to go back to what you'd said before, your question before about people being frightened, because with all of this I've laid out, I want to talk more about that. But I
Okay.
will say, as far as what you just said about being creatives, I have a really dear friend of mine, one of my best friends. We were talking recently. He's a Jewish man. He's very like, he's Jewish by culture. He's not religious. He has a lot of issues with what's going on in Israel. And he was like, I just don't understand people who are proud of being in whatever group they're in, like, he was talking about Jewish people who are like, oh, it's sort of nationalistic, sort of, yeah, yes. But he was like, I don't understand people who, and I said, well, I'm really proud of my group though. And, he's like, people shouldn't, because his point was, it's weird to walk around saying, well, I'm proud to be a fill in the blanks. And I said, well, I am really proud to be Black. A third of the Africans who left that were taken from the continent of Africa during the Middle Passage. A third of them, that's a massive continent. Africa could eat the US and Europe for dinner and still have space for China.
Them all in there at one time.
Yes. So if you think about the magnitude of that, a third of the continent lost to the Middle Passage. And when you look at how many of us ended up here or in the Caribbean, it's not enough to be a third of a continent. A whole lot of us died. So you and I are both descended from people who were captured, who lived on at least some brief period in some sort of an encampment where there were rape rooms, so that, men could, the white European, sailors and traders could have a space to have us in private to do what they needed to do. Sure. People were raped, people were branded, often branded with whatever country that, the British trading company, or the Portuguese company, or whatever, traumatized, taken from families, put on ships where more people died. People died of starvation. People died of diseases. People were thrown off board. There was more rape on the ships. Children were held in shackles. It was horrible. You were force fed if you refused to eat, with terrible contraptions made of metal. We survived all of that. We get here. We have 200 plus years of being separated from children. There's more rape. There's more beatings. There's just killings whenever someone feels like killing you. Yeah. And being sold away from families, and just all of this we've endured.
Dropping history today. I love it. Keep going.
For real. And then Reconstruction, we got sold out because there was a contested presidential election. So fine, we'll pull the troops out of the South. Just give us our president, our Republican president. That happened. It's so funny because it made me think a little bit of 2016 in a way. Well, but because I feel like anytime things really get rough in this country, we're kind of the last consideration.
No kind. Let's put it out there. We're the last.
The very last consideration.
We're the last, but something about the last that always comes up first.
But all of that, and what happened after the Reconstruction with Jim Crow and lynchings, and which were not just in the South. People think that's a Southern thing. There were lynchings in the North. There were lynchings in the Midwest. There were race riots in the North and the Midwest, as well as the South. All of these things. I come from people who have endured. So when I say I am really proud to be Black, because I know that somebody survived that slave encampment to get on that ship. And then somebody survived that ship. And then they survived the ship to get to America. And then they survived America to make other people who would eventually make me. Yeah. So I feel like, I'm pretty
badass. Be proud of that. Yeah, we gotta be proud of that. And when you say the Middle Passage, we don't know how vast that is. Like most of the Africans out of Africa were dropped in Brazil. So we're talking about Brazil having the largest African population other than Africa. And we're talking about South America. Only 8% of Africans came to America. So when I say that, imagine all of us up and down this coast that we were dropped off like our history didn't matter. Where we connected didn't matter. So we
were denied the opportunity to practice our religions as well.
Our languages. Yeah. I mean, in Africa, there's more languages than any place in the world. So when we say this, I try to want people to know our culture and who we are.
Yes.
And so we get into this country and we're still today talking about DEI. This should be a given.
So thank you. That reminds me to go back to your original question. So you were asking me why are we suddenly having
why are they so fearful? Why
are they fearful? Why are people's, hair catching fire now about DEI and calling it horrible things like didn't earn it? Okay, That's a whole other podcast about the
What can you
earning
do
it
in America
piece.
and don't earn it? Please go ahead.
I mean, and who's worked harder for less and yet kept working, still fought for the country, still shows up for the country when we can. So I don't want to hear about didn't earn it, but there's a fear. Going back to what I was saying about generations, and I know that there are millennials and Zoomers who vote for Trump or who are anti-DEI and are on that whole tip, but it's mostly, if you look demographically, a lot of these folks are my age and older.
Yep.
And so going back to what we were talking about earlier about how America has changed, how white-centered America was throughout its history. We are only less than 50 years. I'm 52. So I'm going to say we're probably 40-ish years into even having conversations about whiteness not being at the center of everything. When older Black folks say, oh, well, look, we used to march in beautiful skirts and pearls and suits. And now, look how people dress. Well, because we wore those beautiful skirts and pearls and suits, because we were told we had to look a certain way for white people to be sympathetic to us and to want to even help us in the first place. We had to conform in many ways.
Presentation mattered.
Presentation, speech, even sometimes even the way you conduct your household. There's so many things were about assimilating to whiteness.
And these young folks is like, no, sir.
No, exactly.
What we want to do.
They grew up in a world where they were not told if you don't assimilate to whiteness. We were taught, when I say we, I mean my generation and the generations before me, they were always taught white is right. Absolutely. Because in this country, everything was centered around the white culture, the white voice, and the white image. We are now at a point where we're so many years out from that I turn on my TV, and it's not even like the 80s anymore, where it's like, oh, this is a show with Black people, this is a show with white people. I don't see anything coming on streaming or networks now that doesn't have at least 2 people of color in the cast. And that's important because in my time, even when things got better, like in the 2000s, you'd have that one person of color on. It might be a Black person, it might be an Asian person, it might be a Latino person, but you got your one.
And what you don't see, you can't be. You got to see yourself.
That's right. And when you saw another, when I would see another Black person, I would be like, ooh, is he leaving the show? Because you can't have 2. Now, almost every show you turn on, you see Black folks, white folks, Asian folks, Latino folks, indigenous, increasing numbers of indigenous people's stories are being told in films and television and books, and they're being embraced by more than just the intelligentsia or the indigenous community. We are finally making strides. And that is scary to people who grew up in a time where everything was centered on whiteness. So if you are a white person over the age of 50, you grew up in a time where just about everything in this country was about you. And even if it wasn't about you, your voice was kind of in it. That whole thing we talk about the movies,
you were the official voice,
where you had to have the white person and you tell the stories about people of color through that white person, but there had to be that white person there. That's how the world was for these folks. And now they're living in a time where they're being told, well, wait a minute, not only is your culture not the center of the universe, and we're not going to play those games, and we're not going to assimilate to it because our cultures are valid as well, but we are also expecting that you're going to do more than just treat us like, we're humans also, because that was another big part of civil rights movement, right? Oh my gosh, they're beating, people in the streets. Oh no, children with fire hoses. You can't sit at a lunch counter. You can't sit where you want on the bus. You can't vote without being lynched. Well, now, so that was about, can we just treat us like people?
Yes.
Now that
the
argument,
humanization is regular. You're going to have to humanize.
Now we all know and we all admit, even the people on the opposite side, I think, admit at this point that we're human at least. Yes. So now the conversation is, great. And now we want to have a conversation about privilege and systems and why, not just that Black people are poor, why Black people are poor.
And who did it?
What happened? What had happened and who did it?
That's what they don't want to talk about.
And that's a tough conversation
That's a tough
because
one.
I have a lot of white friends who said they were going to tune into this evening. And hi, you guys. Thank you.
I'm glad they
I'm
are, because we want the conversation to
this
not
is
just be
for
Black.
everybody.
If we don't have others or other people who are actually in society, we don't win. This conversation, we just talk to each other, is not enough. This is DEI is the conversation.
And that is what changed.
That's
I've read so many white folks on Facebook. And again, we're talking about older generations who've said things like, well, nobody cared about race till Obama came along. Black people weren't angry until Obama. No. And I've said to so many people online, look, what changed is that y'all elected him.
And
so
you
we thought maybe we can trust you enough to bring you into the conversation, because the conversation has been going on for as long as we've been here. We just didn't talk to you about it. Now we're bringing you in. Instead of fighting it, you should be grateful. We are saying, hey, we want to include you in the conversation. We want to treat you like an ally or a co-conspirator, even better. Let's fix this together. But you have to be able to hear what's broken and why it's broken to fix it. So if I say to a person I know who is white that, well, my family had to deal with redlining. We weren't allowed to own property that would generate, the kind of generational wealth that property that was not in redlined neighborhoods did. Yeah. We weren't allowed to buy houses that were going to have value. Yeah. After also in a lot of the South, being taxed at higher rates than white people. Black areas were often taxed in property taxes at higher rates and then getting subpar services in exchange for that. So if real estate, and a wise person who's a wealth manager once told me the only two ways in this country of getting rich are through owning a business or real estate. My business is not about getting rich. My business is for the culture. As long as I can feed myself and make my bills, I'm not trying to get rich. I don't know
if you're going to get rich with DEI.
Not with DEI. No one's going to get, we never will say, no one gets rich trying to save the world. That's a rule. Ooh. Nobody. But anyway,
I'm sleep on that one. I'm going to sleep on it. That's it. I'm not going to get rich doing this.
No. But the only two ways to get rich in this country are ownership of real estate and ownership of a business that prospers. And this is coming from a wealth professional.
Even real estate in certain places, because
it has the location matters.
Location matters, and maybe if you have some bad locations, you better have a lot of them.
Yes, that too. So if you look at those two things, right? Business ownership and real estate. Black people, until I'm going to say the 70s, I need to do the research and say
we're at a deficit.
Sure. But I'm talking about, especially in this city, Baltimore, we could not get loans to own businesses.
Absolutely.
People always say, the Jewish community often says, well, we had lots of stores in the Black community. We got along really well with Black folks. We don't understand where the anger is. Asian folks are like, well, we have stores in Black communities.
Because you were
we don't
allowed.
Understand where the anger is. And yeah, the anger has always been, I can't own a store in my own community because I can't get a business loan.
That's it.
And things are better now, but there's still a lot of issues with that one. Exactly. And then real estate, if we have redlining, which was a federal government program that says that people look like you and I can't live in houses, in new housing, in housing that is valued at a high price. And if we move in, everybody else's property values are going to drop by virtue of us even living on the block. So everybody wants to keep us out because the homeowners don't want to lose their value of the property. The government is setting these rules. If you look at these things that kept our communities poor, I was reading something from long ago. It was some sort of research I was doing, and it had to do with the Great Migration and so many of the illegalities that Black folks suffered when they moved north. And I just remember reading what I was reading and thinking, well, where were wasn't there an attorney? Wasn't there an attorney to step in and stand up for their rights? And I thought, well, we were literally maybe 20 years out of slavery. Where are you going to get an attorney? Whose law school has he been to?
The system works for everyone. It amazes me.
Yeah. So if you understand those pieces, if you can connect the pieces of the past, you can understand the present. But those pieces, so if I'm saying my family was not allowed to buy in a certain neighborhood, but yours was, there are a lot of folks who get very defensive because they're hearing that they're complicit somehow in what was
Yes.
done. America is complicit. If you agree that you are an American, even if you came here after all of this was done, by saying I'm an American and grasping onto all the wonderful things America has to offer you, you also have to grasp onto this heritage of oppression and disenfranchisement. And that's where the conversation is breaking down.
Well,
Because
let
your
me ask a
folk,
question quick,
yes, I'm
because
so sorry.
what you're saying is correct. And I think that is one of the biggest things that people have a problem with. We want to move forward. We do not
Yeah,
ever want to talk about particularly what happened.
yeah,
And talking about, I know that's uncomfortable, but if you don't confront it,
yep,
you cannot solve it. That's
right.
just it. And I think that is the biggest issue why we have these DEI issues, is because
Hmm.
in all actuality, what we see is diversity. And
Right.
America loves diversity. We talk about it all the time, on especially the
Well,
international level,
but America doesn't understand
but they don't
diversity.
embrace it.
Yeah. And I
What
think
is
also
that?
there's a lack of understanding in white culture also of what diversity is and looks like.
Mm,
If you ask most white people for a percentage of how many people how many people of color would there need to be for it to be a diverse setting? It's like what I've read is that it's
mhm,
often 10%. Whereas if you ask people of color, the answer is usually 40%. So
mm,
there's a big difference, pardon me, between 10% and 40%.
big difference.
So, that's a picture right there. The people, but again, talking about people 50 and up, and I'm sorry if I sound ageist in all of this. It's about
But there's still
generations
some
and
young people too,
experience.
though, Sister
Oh no,
Melanie.
there
Yeah.
are. I mean,
Don't think
definitely.
that, because this stuff is like genetics.
Oh,
If you don't change, then you teach it, and you don't even know you're
absolutely.
teaching it.
Oh, exposure is
And it's baked in the
huge.
system. So
Yes.
young people,
Well,
when you go to
and
college and a young person tells you that you're there because of some type of somebody gave you this space, or because you're
mhm.
black, they've been taught that.
Absolutely. And that's the other piece is that children, I've also done a lot of research into development of race and ideas of race in
Okay.
children because my background originally way back was
Yeah, we want
elementary
to talk about, you were a
education.
teacher.
I
So
was a teacher,
yeah.
and the developmental psychologists
Hmm.
who are doing research around kids and race have found that kids start to form ideas about race as young as 3 and 4 years old. They're looking around to see who's in charge, who's not in charge, who pushes a broom, who wears a tie, who gets called sir and people seem to listen to them,
Yeah.
and who's the person who doesn't seem to count. And then they're making reasons for that, right?
Yeah.
Most Americans, now there are some racist people out there, but most people don't say to a 3 or 4 year old, that person's black, so he's lazy and he's not as smart, and that's why he's poor. But if you teach children, well, if you work hard, you'll make a lot of money. If you work, if
If you
you
don't
are
work hard,
smart,
you're gonna push a
if you
broom.
don't work hard, you're going to push a broom. If you're
Yep.
smart, you're going to go to a great college and have a wonderful career as a professional making six figures. And if
You're
aren't
gonna be
smart,
you're gonna be a
you have this
hoodlum, go to jail.
exactly. So if you're 3 and 4 and you're seeing that the people who look one certain way fit these things, and people who look a different way fit these things, well, why? Why is it that the brown people seem to be pushing the brooms so often? And if you're 3 and 4 and no one is bothered to talk to you about race,
Yeah.
the logical conclusion is these people must not work as hard as my dad. These
Hmm.
people must not be as smart as my mom.
Sure.
And so a lot of it is, but also people talk about microaggressions. People say a lot of very casually racist things around their children. And the other thing that the developmental psychologists have found that really impacts kids' ideas around race, it's all not just what parents say, it's what parents allow to be said. So if mom is saying to you, oh no, I want you to be around people of other races and I want you to realize we're all equal and blah, blah, blah. And then though, uncle and grandma are sitting in the room saying things that are
Not
really
around those
racist
people.
and mom and dad don't say boo to them about
Yeah.
it, then the message the children are getting is, Oh, okay. So let me
Messaging
file
matters.
this away. Let me file this away in my head. So yeah,
Right?
there is a lot, and there are a lot of younger people in this country who are younger white men in particular who are in we have a
Who are
crisis of
very
men.
fearful. Younger white
They're
men are
very
very
fearful.
fearful. Yes.
And almost every crisis that white America has, Black America's already had. Nobody paid attention to it or did anything about it, and now it's a white problem. And this
Yes.
whole thing with the young men failing to thrive, not going to school, not doing well in
We
K through
created
12,
that. Black
not
men have been going through this for 30, 40 years.
all the things I'm hearing that people are afraid of because, oh, the white men, these young white men are not thriving, are all things we were saying about Black boys in the 90s and the
Yes.
80s, but they were
Yes.
thugs and they were, useless or whatever. And now it's happening to white America, and it's a crisis, just like with opioids versus crack, or
Yep.
many, many teen pregnancies, another one. So another piece is that you've got all these disaffected white males out there right now who are young. The promise of America has always, for white people, has
Yeah.
always been that this is their country. We happen to be here, but this is their country. They're supposed to succeed.
But
So
how
when they're not succeeding and they start to see other people making these strides, part of the thinking is, well, wait a minute, how come that Black kid sitting in my seat at this
but I,
college?
but I have a question, Melanie.
Yeah.
Let me ask you something. How in your mindset do you get this thought that you own something that you didn't originate in?
That's a good one.
You didn't originate. When I hear them talk about immigrants,
Yeah.
how do you get this mindset that you're not an immigrant and this is yours? I don't understand. It doesn't bother. It really has me baffled. Like, how can you say to others what they cannot do
I
when
know.
you did the same thing and did
I
it at a
know.
more malicious manner? Wh- wh- How do
True.
we? How do we forget this? Like, this is now mine, and you have to follow rules, and you followed no rules. You killed, maimed, took. You took everything. So then people come in and they want best for their families, and
Yeah.
they have to come in a certain way,
Right.
and you make the rules.
And you
It,
decide who came right and who didn't
it's so
also.
disingenuous, and it's
Right.
hypocritical. And I hear it all the time. It's like these
Mhm.
immigrants. You are an immigrant.
Let's also not forget that a huge swath of the western part of the United States was Mexico.
Was Mexico?
Up
You bought
until
you
yeah,
took that.
yeah. And
California.
now
Let's
we're
go that whole
complaining about
area.
Mexicans coming back to what
They're
was
coming home.
Mexico.
Yes. These
Yeah.
folks are coming to what was actually theirs. You forget that.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. And
th-
but so the answer to what you're asking about that, and I can't believe
yes.
it got me all
How do
like
we
I've gotten
forget
into an
history?
hour. Well, it's taken me an hour to say these magic words. White supremacy is what that is. It is the idea, and this is a very American notion. And I do challenge anyone watching this, whatever race you are, to really think about the messages of America. White supremacy, people think of it as being the Tiki Torch guys or the Klan or the Proud Boys. White supremacy is saying that the needs of the white community trump other communities. The
Yes.
culture of the white community, white culture
It's more
trumps
important than every
other
culture.
cultures. That
Yes.
is what white supremacy is. And that's what we're fighting. So why are people scared? Because a country where a lot of folks were born being told this is your birthright. Success here is your birthright. And no matter how poor and downtrodden you are, at least you don't look like those people. At least you're not them because they're at the bottom of the barrel. So when you're told that your whole life,
True.
and then you see again a Black kid sitting in a seat that you think should have been your seat at the college, or your boss is now a person of color, a woman of color,
Ha.
that's a massive, not only is a shift for people who can make the shift, it's a downright insult for others. One thing I always say is that for me, one in the professional sphere, one of the ways that I assess in some ways the performance professionally of white men is whether or not they can accept the leadership of a Black woman.
Hmm. Ooh, and that's very hard for them. Trust me.
Very
Very,
hard.
very hard for them. So
Very hard.
that's very hard. Let me ask you a little bit about your work because we went the history route.
Okay.
I love that because we had to break it down so folks can understand why your work is so important and where does all of these behaviors come from. They don't just appear. They've been baked in for years. And now we see them manifesting through generation after generation. So what I want to, you're actually doing this work in your firm.
I am.
And first of all, you named it after yourself. Why'd you do that to yourself? Tell me.
So I was really unhappy in my previous job, and I
Okay.
felt, I'm going to say it, I felt a certain level of disrespect and dismissal. And I did feel that it was very racialized. I will say that.
Okay.
So I felt very hemmed in with that job. I wanted to open my own business, primarily, first of all, to do work that was really important to me that I could not do
Sure.
within that job. And when the organization told me that I was not allowed to own my own business, that it was their choice whether or not I could have a business, and they chose for me not to, I had to make a decision, and I decided to bet on me.
And name it after you.
And so that's part of the naming of the company after me, because I'm betting on me. This is me. I've been working through, within other people's boundaries, frameworks, whatever, for at that point, gosh, probably like 25, 30 years. And I'm like, well, now this is my turn. Now I'm running this show. I get to decide what clients I take on. I get to provide some leadership for those clients, to lead them to where they need to go, to make their organizations more equitable and more inclusive. I share things like I've shared today with those clients, depending on what they hire me for, of course. But my job
let's
is
hear
to
a little bit of your work. Like, how does it? Because we're 56 minutes in. That's what I love talking. Yeah. So I want to hear like what is some applications of your work? Because it's very important. Yeah,
absolutely. And there are a lot of them. So the thing that the work that I will say I do most frequently with nonprofits is helping them to create strategies around being more diverse. And I mean diverse in a way that is meaningful, not just having, faces that look a certain way in the room. How to be more inclusive in what they're doing, to have the voices there, listen to the voices, strategize and plan with those voices, and how to be a more equitable organization as well, if equity is a piece of that puzzle, which often it is. Often that work, well, and it's a lot. It's a lot of talking to people in the organization. I caucus people. I know from experience that there are things that Black folks or that people of color are going to say around other people of color. There are things that white folks may want to express that they may not express with me being the person running a caucus. So that it begins with a lot of conversations and a lot of digging. It's a needs assessment. From there, I build a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan for my clients, where it maps out, here are the goals, here are the objectives, here are the strategies that and here's some milestones. By next fiscal year, you will have made this stride in maybe attracting more diverse people to your organization, or in serving your community better in these specific ways, and then there's the I'm trying to say so many words. Then there's the implementation piece, which usually is where the education happens. So that's where the workshops and the professional development and the coaching and all of those things. And so a lot of the things we've talked about today are the topics that get introduced during that training period.
Got it.
Helping organizations to better understand race, to better understand how it impacts all of us. And then there's also a shift in thinking. Older folks, and again, I'm talking my age and older, who are white folks, often look at work that has to do with racism and anti-racism as being trying to solve or help solve the problems for the people of color.
They're the saviors.
Exactly. What I keep trying, what my approach with my clients, and the thing that I want them and need them to understand very early on, the work is not charity. This is about the fact that in 2024, you cannot survive as an organization, especially in an area, you cannot survive, I'll say, in a geographic area like this, without including people of color, without decentering whiteness in your organization.
If you want to keep going, you have to change.
You want to keep going. So if your issue is that your members are mostly, white and over the age of blah, 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 and my goal is to help you bring in younger and more diverse people, one thing you got to understand, young white people have said to me in this work that I do, I don't want to be a part of an organization that isn't diverse. We're in a very different moment here, but you can't attract people of color unless you have something that you are offering them. There's often this idea, oh, well, of course we're wonderful, and if we just open the doors, people of color will just come right in. Well, why would people of color want to attend your church? Why would people of color want to be a member of your organization? What are you doing that makes this something that they would want to be a part of? And part of that is the decentering of whiteness. No one wants to come.
Isn't that hard when you think you're the standard, though? If you think you're the standard, it's very hard for you to understand that people won't enjoy what you enjoy.
That's my job.
Oh,
my job is to break that information down and to educate folks about it. But also, and a lot of this work, and I've been to some great DEI and anti-racism and equity workshops before, people really take a hearts and minds approach most of the time. And that's great. That's just not what I do. My thing is, I'm talking about systemic racism. I'm talking about systems. So my job is to come into your organization and help build systems that will dismantle that systemic racism.
Wow. So my last question. So with all of this repealing of the DEI, a lot of the DEI initiatives out here, because I just read that Duke University just repealed their scholarship that was 100% for Black students, coming from a Black student that got killed in 1978 in a car accident. And now any student, and everyone can get this money, in other words. And the money that Duke University is getting from African-American students, the mitigated goal. But anyway, so I just read that. So do you think if this is what your firm does, are they putting you out of business, sis?
No. No.
Are they coming for you?
I mean, they're coming for me, but are they going to put me out of business? Absolutely not.
You can't.
My business has only grown in the last year, because just as those people who are against this and are fearful of it or are resentful of the progress, just as those people are doing whatever they can to dismantle all of this, first of all, they're in the minority. Second of all, just as many organizations, if not more so, are saying, no, we have to be better than this. And now I will say, after George Floyd in 2020, every white organization was saying, come tell us, it's different. That has died down.
We got techno memory. We forget
really, right. But those who really meant it have stuck by it. And others have not. And the other piece of this is finding ways that I can make an impact in other places. If there's anyone watching this who, is in Florida or Alabama or Texas or Mississippi or the Carolinas, I want to come and work and help be a part of the solution there. I'm in the DMV, Delaware. Oh, I'm sorry, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And DMC is not the same as a lot of other parts of this country. That's true. I would like to do more work in those areas. One thing I'm doing this summer is my company is going to be launching, and it's a little pilot program here in Baltimore and then one online, diversity, equity, and inclusion book clubs for children. Because we keep hearing about these kids all over the country and the banned books, and they can't read about, things that they really should be reading about to prepare them for the world they're coming into.
Absolutely.
So my goal this summer is to have a group of Baltimore City kids. I have a teacher, a wonderful veteran educator who I'm working with this, and she's going to do the book clubs. So one for Baltimore City kids, and then one for kids across the country. Beautiful. Where they would meet via Zoom. And
Oh,
one of the goals for that is we want kids from everywhere, but we
yes.
definitely want some kids from these places where books have been banned, where they can't read them in school. So they
Need
can
them in
read them in
Florida.
books.
Florida, get a club in Florida. That's
Yes.
amazing. Well, our
Yeah.
young people have to read about themselves. They have to read about history, even if it's not about themselves. History
Mhm.
is a whole plethora of people.
It
And so
is.
you have to, and so that's very important. I love that. It's starting young. If we can get these young minds reshaped, then we can stop some of this foolishness we
That's the
see.
key.
That is the key. DEI is important, guys. This is why we had this. DEI is very important. We are diverse. We all need equity, and we
We
all should be
do.
included. That's just what it is. And you know what? I work in the health field, and I just want the world to know. I want out here in the U.S. to know the birth rates for white people are not that high. Let's be
No,
honest.
I'm
So
aware.
genetics is walking you down.
Yeah.
You have to include others.
Yeah.
Stop the foolishness.
Yeah.
Learn other people's cultures. Respect other people's cultures. It's okay. We're all humans. This
Mhm.
race thing is a such social construct. It was made up for division. It's not real. It does not have a genetic disposition in your body. There's no such thing. We're people. And so that's how I'm going to end this. But I want you to definitely leave your jewel. Tell us, leave something inspirational with the people. We want to hear Melanie's jewel.
Oh, well, okay. I'm going to piggyback off of what you just said about
Okay.
race not being real. It's a construct, just like a piece of paper. I can't take
Yeah.
any old piece of paper to the store and get goods, right? It's got to be
Right.
a special piece of paper.
Got to be a
But,
dollar.
we've agreed that piece of paper has worth. Same thing with race. It's not real. It's not. However, it is a construct that has a massive influence and impact on
Yes.
all of our everyday lives. And it's 2024. And the only way America can move forward successfully is all of us coming together,
Yes.
understanding and respecting each other's cultures and learning from each other.
Beautiful. I really enjoyed you, Melanie. I just really appreciate your wisdom and definitely your history lesson that you took us through. And I love when these teachers, y'all come on and talk in paragraphs. I just love it.
I talk a lot too.
Nothing wrong with that. I definitely, you have to come back and give us an
I would
update
love that.
on the children's book club this summer. That is
Okay.
something I want to hear about, and the initiatives that you continue to create, because it's
Thank
very
you.
important for all of us. So this work that you do, we want to say thank you and ashe to you. Continue the path.
Oh, thank
Continue on this
you.
path. We really appreciate what you bring to society, you bring to these businesses. We need you.
Thank you. That means a lot to me.
Oh, trust me. I really, really mean that. And Black Boxes, we've had a great night, a great community conversation, a sister circle today. And guys, I really appreciate it. Please like, share, subscribe. Let me say that again. Like, share, subscribe to Black Box Radio. We got to black up the algorithm. We got to black it up. Help us grow. Please drop us a line at blackboxradio@gmail.com. If you want to come on, you have something to contribute to the community. We're Black centered, but we love people. So I want to say good night to everyone. We've had Melanie Hood-Wilson of the Melanie Hood-Wilson and Associates Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion firm. Have a good night, everyone. Good night, Melanie. Give us some deuces.
Bye, deuces.
Don't go nowhere. See you guys. Good night, Black Boxes.